Jasmine leaned against the old oak tree at the edge of the village, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of rain-soaked earth and the distant murmur of waves crashing against the rocky shore. Her fingers clutched the worn leather-bound journal she had found just hours ago, tucked away in the attic of her late grandfather's house. It wasn't the kind of discovery she had expected, a relic of a life she barely knew. Yet, from the moment she opened its brittle pages, her world shifted. The handwriting was shaky but legible, filled with cryptic notes and half-finished sketches. One page, in particular, caught her eye. It spoke of a hidden treasure buried beneath the cliffs that lined the coast, guarded by a mystery no one had dared to uncover. Jasmine couldn't explain why, but something about those words pulled at her, igniting a spark she hadn't felt in years. Life in the village had always been predictable, even dull, and the thought of unraveling this decades-old secret filled her with both excitement and dread. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie orange glow over the landscape, Jasmine felt the weight of her decision. She had spent the afternoon trying to piece together the clues in the journal, tracing her grandfather's notes back to their origins. The map drawn on the back page was crude and incomplete, but it pointed toward the cliffs, the place everyone in the village avoided. Legends spoke of strange happenings there, whispers of shadows that moved against the wind and voices that called out in the dead of night. Most dismissed it as folklore, but deep down, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that her grandfather had known more than he let on. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps crunching through the damp grass behind her. Jasmine turned sharply, clutching the journal to her chest. Standing a few feet away was Liam, her childhood friend, now grown into a man whose curiosity often matched her own. His face was tense, his dark eyes scanning her for an explanation. "You've been up here all day," he said, his voice low. "What are you doing?" For a moment, Jasmine hesitated. Sharing the secret felt risky, but she couldn't do this alone. She opened the journal, tilting it so Liam could see the map and the cryptic symbols scattered across the pages. His expression shifted from confusion to intrigue, and Jasmine knew he was hooked. "This isn't just a story," she whispered. "He wanted someone to find this." Liam took a step closer, his gaze fixed on the journal. "You're not seriously thinking of going out there, are you?" Jasmine met his eyes, her resolve hardening. "I have to. If he believed in it enough to leave these clues, there's something out there worth finding." Before Liam could respond, a cold gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a faint, haunting sound, a low, mournful cry that sent chills racing down their spines. Jasmine's grip on the journal tightened. Something was waiting for them at the cliffs, and the night was only just beginning. Liam stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of the faint cry carried by the wind. Jasmine could feel her pulse quicken. It wasn't just the sound itself, it was the way it seemed to pierce through the stillness of the evening, unnatural and chilling. She looked back at him, hoping he'd have some kind of explanation, but his furrowed brow told her he was just as unsettled. "Maybe it's the wind," Liam muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. He glanced at the journal again, then toward the cliffs in the distance, now bathed in shadows. Or maybe something else. Jasmine didn't respond. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind, cryptic phrases scattered throughout the journal. "Beware the guardian, the path is only revealed to the brave," and the most unsettling of all, "What is hidden cannot be claimed without sacrifice." They sounded like riddles, and she couldn't tell if they were warnings or encouragements. Either way, her curiosity burned stronger than her fear. "He knew," Jasmine said softly, almost to herself. "He knew there was something out there. That's why he left this." Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, if we're doing this, we need a plan. We can't just wander out there in the dark with nothing but an old map and a bunch of cryptic notes." Jasmine nodded, her grip on the journal loosening slightly. "You're right. We'll go in the morning, at first light. But we have to do it, Liam. I need to know what he was trying to tell me." Liam studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a reluctant nod, he said, "All right. But we stick together, no matter what." The two of them turned back toward the village, the faint glow of lanterns in the distance offering a sense of normalcy. Yet, as they walked, the weight of the journal in Jasmine's hands felt heavier with each step. Her mind raced with questions. Why had her grandfather kept this hidden? What was he searching for? And most importantly, what had he meant by sacrifice? That night, Jasmine sat by the flickering light of a candle in her small room, poring over the journal's pages once more. The sketches were crude but haunting, symbols she didn't recognize, rough outlines of the cliffs, and strange, shadowy figures drawn in the margins. It was as if her grandfather had tried to capture something beyond words, something that frightened even him. She flipped to the last page, the one with the map. It wasn't detailed, just a rough outline of the cliffs and a single X marked in a small cove at the base. Her grandfather's handwriting beside it read, "Here lies the key." A shiver ran down her spine. A key to what? Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time Jasmine closed her eyes, she saw the cliffs, dark and ominous, and heard the faint cry that had chilled her earlier. When the first light of dawn finally broke, she was already up, stuffing the journal into her bag and lacing her boots. Liam was waiting for her outside, his face pale but determined. He held a flashlight and a sturdy walking stick, looking more prepared than Jasmine had expected. "Figured we might need these," he said, offering a small, tense smile. As they made their way out of the village and toward the cliffs, the air grew colder, heavier. The path narrowed, twisting through tall grass and jagged rocks, and the sound of the ocean grew louder with every step. Jasmine kept the journal close, checking the map occasionally to make sure they were on the right track. When they finally reached the edge of the cliffs, the view took her breath away. The waves crashed violently against the rocks below, sending sprays of mist into the air. The cove marked on the map was just visible, partially hidden by a dense fog that clung to the shoreline. "This is it," Jasmine whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the sea. Liam scanned the area, his grip tightening on the walking stick. "So, what now?" Jasmine pulled out the journal, flipping to the page with the map. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the path leading down to the cove. "We find the key," she said, though her voice wavered. As they began their descent, the wind picked up, carrying with it a sound that stopped them both in their tracks, a low, guttural groan that seemed to rise from the very earth beneath their feet. Jasmine's eyes darted to Liam, whose face was pale as he whispered, "That didn't sound like the wind." Jasmine took a shaky breath and stepped forward, her heart pounding. Whatever lay ahead, there was no turning back now. Jasmine's steps were slow and deliberate as she made her way down the uneven path toward the cove. The mist thickened around them, blurring the line between land and sea. Each step felt heavier than the last, the air dense with an unshakable unease. Liam followed closely behind, his flashlight beam cutting through the fog in shaky, nervous arcs. Neither of them spoke, their silence filled with the weight of unspoken questions and the eerie groans that seemed to echo from the cliffs. The path grew narrower, forcing Jasmine to cling to the damp rock wall for balance. Her fingers were cold and trembling, but she gripped the journal tightly, as if letting go of it might cause the answers she sought to vanish. The roar of the waves grew louder, their crashes against the rocks below sending vibrations up through the ground. She glanced back at Liam, who gave her a stiff nod, his jaw set in determination despite the fear in his eyes. As they reached the base of the cliffs, the cove came into full view. It was smaller than Jasmine had imagined, a crescent of jagged rocks and black sand half submerged in frothy waves. In the center, partially hidden by the tide, was a dark opening, an entrance to what looked like a cave. Jasmine's heart raced. The map had marked this spot with an X, and now, standing before it, she understood why. The cave loomed like a shadowed moor, its edges worn smooth by centuries of relentless tides. "Are you sure about this?" Liam asked, his voice low but strained. He kept his gaze fixed on the cave, as if daring it to give him a reason to turn back. Jasmine hesitated, the weight of his question sinking in. "No," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But we've come this far. We can't stop now." Liam sighed, then nodded. "All right. Let's stick together." They waded through the shallow water, the cold biting at their ankles as they approached the cave. Jasmine shined the flashlight Liam had handed her into the darkness, revealing walls slick with seaweed and strange, mossy symbols etched into the stone. She paused, running her fingers over one of the carvings. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen, a mix of geometric patterns and flowing curves that seemed almost alive in the flickering light. "What do you think it means?" Liam asked, peering over her shoulder. "I don't know," Jasmine replied, her voice tight. "But my grandfather must have known. He wouldn't have sent us here for nothing." As they moved deeper into the cave, the sounds of the outside world faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. The air was damp and heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang that made Jasmine's stomach churn. The flashlight beam caught something glinting on the ground, a small, rusted object half buried in the sand. She crouched down to pick it up, brushing away the grit to reveal an old key. Its ornate design mirrored the symbols on the walls, confirming its significance. Liam knelt beside her, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "Is this the key your grandfather wrote about?" "It has to be," Jasmine said, her voice trembling with both excitement and dread. She held it up to the light, examining its intricate details. "But if this is the key, what does it unlock?" Before Liam could respond, a low, guttural sound rumbled through the cave, louder and closer than anything they had heard before. Jasmine froze, her grip tightening on the key. The sound wasn't natural. It was deliberate, almost like a warning. Liam's eyes darted toward the shadows at the far end of the cave. "We're not alone," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. The flashlight beam wavered as her hands shook, illuminating the walls and floor in jagged, erratic flashes. Then, just beyond the reach of the light, a shadow moved, slow, deliberate, and impossibly large. "Run," Liam hissed, grabbing her arm. But Jasmine couldn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the ground, her eyes fixed on the darkness as the shadow shifted again, this time accompanied by the faintest sound of dragging footsteps. "We have to go." Liam's voice snapped her out of her trance, and she stumbled to her feet, clutching the key as they scrambled back toward the cave's entrance. The sound of the shadow's movements grew louder, echoing off the walls and filling the narrow space with a deep, resonant growl. As they burst out into the open air, gasping and soaked, the weight of what they had encountered hung heavy between them. Jasmine clutched the key to her chest, her mind racing with questions she wasn't ready to face. Whatever they had found wasn't just her grandfather's secret. It was something far older and far more dangerous than she had imagined. And it wasn't going to let them go so easily. The wind howled around Jasmine and Liam as they stumbled away from the cave, the shadow's guttural growl still reverberating in their ears. The cliffs loomed ominously above them, and the crashing waves felt closer than ever, their icy spray stinging their faces. Jasmine clutched the key tightly in her hand, its jagged edges digging into her palm, as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Every instinct told her to run, to get as far away as possible, but something deeper, something primal, pulled her back toward the mystery they had uncovered. Liam was breathing heavily, his flashlight shaking in his hand as he scanned their surroundings. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "Jasmine, we shouldn't have come here. This is way bigger than us." She turned to him, her own panic mirrored in his wide eyes. "I don't know what it is, but my grandfather knew. He left this key for a reason, Liam. If we stop now, we'll never know the truth." "The truth?" Liam snapped, his voice rising above the wind. "What if the truth gets us killed? That thing, whatever it was, isn't just some story. It's real, and it's dangerous." Jasmine looked down at the key, its intricate design glinting faintly in the dim light. She felt a strange connection to it, as though it were alive, pulsating with an energy she couldn't explain. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind again. What is hidden cannot be claimed without sacrifice. She didn't know what he had meant, but now the weight of those words felt impossible to ignore. "Liam," she said, her voice quieter but steadier, "I need to see this through. You don't have to come with me, but I can't walk away now." Liam stared at her, his jaw tightening. For a moment, she thought he might turn back, leave her to face the unknown alone. But then he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "You're impossible, you know that? Fine. But we stick together, and the second this gets any worse, we're out of here." They moved cautiously along the shoreline, the mist clinging to them like a second skin. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of their footsteps on the rocks, the roar of the waves, the faint whisper of the wind. And then, beneath it all, the low, rhythmic groan of the shadow in the cave, following them. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either, and the realization sent shivers down Jasmine's spine. The map in her grandfather's journal had marked a second location, deeper along the cliffs. Jasmine kept her eyes on the path ahead, her grip on the key tightening with every step. As they rounded a bend, a strange structure came into view, a stone archway carved into the cliffside, its surface covered in the same symbols they had seen in the cave. The air around it felt colder, heavier, as though it carried the weight of centuries. "This is it," Jasmine whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. She stepped closer, the key almost humming in her hand. The symbols on the arch seemed to pulse faintly, responding to her presence. Liam grabbed her arm, his voice urgent. "Wait. You don't know what's on the other side." "I don't have to," Jasmine said, her voice firm. "This is what he wanted me to find." She reached out, sliding the key into a small, almost imperceptible slot in the center of the arch. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all this time. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low rumble, the arch began to glow, the symbols lighting up in a cascade of golden light. The ground beneath their feet shook, and the air filled with an eerie hum. Jasmine and Liam stepped back as the archway began to shift, its stone surface splitting apart to reveal a dark, spiraling passage that seemed to stretch endlessly downward. The sound of the shadow from the cave grew louder, as if it had been awakened by the opening of the arch. Jasmine's heart raced. She could feel the pull of the passage, an invisible force urging her forward. Liam's grip on her arm tightened, his voice trembling. "Jasmine, we don't have to go in there. Whatever's down there, it's not worth it." But Jasmine couldn't tear her eyes away. Her grandfather's voice seemed to echo in her mind, urging her to take the next step, to uncover the truth he had spent his life chasing. The passage seemed alive, its depths whispering secrets she couldn't quite hear. And then, from the darkness, came a sound that froze her in place, a voice, soft and familiar, calling her name. "Jasmine!" Jasmine froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice was unmistakable, soft, familiar, yet impossible. It sounded exactly like her grandfather. She turned toward the passage, her legs trembling as she tried to make sense of what she had just heard. Liam grabbed her arm, his grip almost painful, his voice sharp and panicked. "Did you hear that?" Tell me you heard that." His flashlight flickered as his hand shook, the beam bouncing off the walls of the archway. The glow from the symbols had dimmed, but the passage remained open, yawning like a dark void that seemed to beckon her closer. "It's him," Jasmine whispered, barely able to find her voice. "Liam, it's my grandfather. He's down there." "That's not possible," Liam said, his voice strained. "He's gone, Jasmine. You know that. Whatever this is, it's not him." Jasmine wanted to believe him, but something deep inside her refused to let go of the possibility. The voice had been so clear, so real, and if the key had been meant to lead her here, what if the passage held more than just answers? What if it held her grandfather himself? She took a tentative step toward the dark spiral, the pull stronger now, almost magnetic. The air felt thicker, heavier, as though the passage itself were alive, breathing her name and urging her forward. Liam stepped in front of her, blocking her path, his face pale and desperate. "Jasmine, stop," he said firmly. "Whatever's down there isn't your grandfather. It's a trap. You saw the shadow in the cave. You heard that growl. This isn't some fairy tale where everything ends happily ever after. But what if it is him?" Jasmine's voice cracked as tears welled in her eyes. "What if he's been waiting for me all this time? I can't just walk away, Liam. I can't." Liam hesitated, torn between his fear and his loyalty to her. Before he could respond, the ground beneath them trembled again, more violently this time. The glow from the archway reignited, brighter than before, and a low, resonant hum filled the air. From the passage, the voice came again, louder now, clearer. "Jasmine, please, help me." Her heart twisted painfully. The voice sounded desperate, pleading, and it was enough to push her forward. She slipped past Liam before he could stop her, clutching the key in one hand and the flashlight in the other. She stepped into the passage, the darkness swallowing her immediately. The walls pulsed faintly with a dim light, guiding her steps deeper into the spiral. "Jasmine, come back." Liam's voice echoed behind her, but she couldn't turn back now. She could hear her grandfather calling her name again, the sound growing louder with each step she took. The air grew colder as she descended, her breath visible in the faint light. The metallic tang she had noticed earlier was stronger now, mingling with the unmistakable scent of damp earth. The passage twisted and turned, narrowing at points before opening into a larger space. The hum of the walls grew louder, vibrating through her chest like a second heartbeat. And then she saw it. The chamber was vast, its walls covered in the same glowing symbols, but they were brighter here, pulsating in a rhythm that matched the hum. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it was an object that made her blood run cold. It was a small, intricately carved box, its surface shimmering as if it were made of liquid light. Beside it, on the ground, lay something that made her gasp, a pair of boots she recognized instantly. Her grandfather's boots. Before she could move closer, the growl returned, louder and more menacing than ever. It echoed through the chamber, shaking the ground beneath her feet. She spun around, her flashlight beam darting wildly across the walls, but the source of the sound remained hidden. The growl deepened, turning into a low, guttural laugh that sent chills racing down her spine. "You've come so far, little one," a voice rumbled, deep and otherworldly. It wasn't her grandfather. It wasn't human. The shadows in the corners of the chamber shifted, coalescing into a form that seemed to defy logic. It was tall, impossibly so, its body a swirling mass of darkness with faint, glowing eyes that burned like embers. Jasmine stumbled back, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. The key in her hand grew warm, almost hot, and she could feel the pulsing energy from the box intensify, as if the two were connected. The figure took a step closer, its presence filling the room with a suffocating weight. "What you seek comes at a cost," the voice said, its tone cold and unrelenting. "Are you willing to pay the price?" Jasmine's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic swirl of fear and determination. She glanced at the box, then at the figure, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Whatever her grandfather had found, whatever he had left for her to uncover, it wasn't just a secret. It was a choice. One that could change everything, and not necessarily for the better. Jasmine's heart pounded as the figure loomed closer, its glowing eyes burning into her. The warmth of the key in her hand was almost unbearable now, as if it were alive, reacting to the tension in the chamber. She took a shaky step back, her gaze darting between the swirling mass of darkness and the glowing box on the pedestal. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her grandfather's voice echoed once more, faint and desperate, calling her name. She couldn't leave. Not now. "What is the price?" she asked, her voice trembling but determined. The figure's laugh reverberated through the chamber, a low and chilling sound. "The price is what you hold most dear," it said, its voice cold and final. "The key is not a gift. It is a burden, meant only for those who are willing to sacrifice everything." Jasmine's grip tightened on the key, her thoughts racing. Her grandfather had come here, faced this same choice, and left behind this journal and map for her to follow. But why? What had he sacrificed? Was it his life, or something deeper, something worse? She turned her eyes to the glowing box, its light pulsating like a heartbeat, and realized that whatever lay inside, it wasn't meant for power or treasure. It was something far more dangerous. Behind her, Liam's voice broke through the tension. "Jasmine, don't do this." He had caught up, panting and wide-eyed as he took in the scene. "This isn't worth it. Whatever that thing is, it's lying. We need to leave. Now." Jasmine shook her head, her chest tightening. "I can't, Liam. If my grandfather faced this and chose to leave the key behind, there's a reason. Maybe he wanted me to finish what he couldn't." She turned back to the figure. "If I open the box, will it bring him back?" The figure stilled, its form seeming to ripple and shift. "What is lost can never truly return," it said, its tone almost mocking. "But you may glimpse what lies beyond the veil." Jasmine's fingers trembled as she lifted the key toward the box. The air around her seemed to thrum with energy, the symbols on the walls glowing brighter in response. Liam shouted behind her, his voice breaking with desperation, but she couldn't stop now. She fit the key into the slot on the box, the warmth in her hand radiating outward until it felt like fire. With a twist, the lock clicked, and the box slowly opened. A blinding light burst from within, flooding the chamber and forcing Jasmine to shield her eyes. The roar of the figure turned into a deafening scream, its form unraveling into wisps of darkness that dissolved into the air. As the light dimmed, Jasmine lowered her hand and looked inside the box. Her breath caught. The box held no treasure, no power. Instead, it contained a single, flickering image, a memory suspended like a fragile flame. It was her grandfather, younger than she'd ever seen him, standing in the same chamber, holding the key. He looked afraid but resolute, his lips moving as though he were speaking. Then, with a sudden flash, the memory shifted. It showed her grandfather turning away, setting the key down on the pedestal, and walking into the shadows. Jasmine felt a lump rise in her throat. He had chosen to leave, to abandon whatever truth the box held. But why? The light in the chamber began to fade, and the box snapped shut, the key now fused into its surface. The symbols on the walls dimmed, leaving only the sound of the waves echoing faintly from the passage behind them. Liam grabbed her arm, pulling her back toward the spiral. "We're leaving. Now." Jasmine didn't resist. As they stumbled out into the cold night air, the cliffs eerily silent, she turned the events over in her mind. Her grandfather's decision to walk away now seemed like an act of strength, not failure. He had seen what lay within the box, and he had chosen to protect her from it. Whatever knowledge the box contained wasn't meant to be understood, it was meant to be left behind. But as they climbed back to the safety of the village, the faintest whisper followed Jasmine, carried on the wind. It wasn't her grandfather's voice this time. It was something darker, more ancient, and it sent a chill racing through her. "You opened the door, little one, and now it cannot be closed." Jasmine and Liam reached the edge of the village just as the first hints of dawn touched the sky. The soft orange glow should have felt comforting, but the events at the cliffs weighed heavily on both of them. Jasmine clutched the journal tightly against her chest, her thoughts tangled in a web of fear, guilt, and unanswered questions. Liam walked beside her in silence, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and unease. The wind carried a faint chill, wrapping around them like a reminder of what they had left behind. When they finally reached Jasmine's house, Liam stopped at the gate and turned to face her. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "That whisper." Jasmine hesitated, the memory of the dark voice still fresh in her mind. She nodded. "It said the door couldn't be closed. I don't know what it means, but it's not over." Liam exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Whatever that thing was, it's dangerous. We should tell someone. Maybe someone who knows what to do about this kind of stuff." But Jasmine shook her head, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Who would believe us, Liam? And even if they did, what could they do? My grandfather left that key behind for a reason. He chose to walk away. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do too." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Liam nodded reluctantly. "All right. But if anything else happens, anything, you call me." Jasmine managed a small, tired smile. "I will. I promise." After Liam left, she stepped inside her house, the quietness of the space almost deafening after the chaos of the night. She set the journal down on the kitchen table, staring at it as if it might come alive and reveal its secrets. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it to the final page, where her grandfather had drawn the map to the cliffs. She traced the lines with her finger, her thoughts drifting to the choice he had made all those years ago. It was clearer now. He had faced the same questions, the same pull toward the unknown, and he had chosen to protect the world, and perhaps himself, by leaving it behind. Jasmine closed the journal and placed it in a drawer, turning the key in the lock. Whatever answers it held would stay there, untouched. That night, Jasmine sat by her window, staring out at the stars. The whisper still echoed faintly in her mind, but she felt a strange sense of peace. She hadn't found the closure she had hoped for, but she had found something else, an understanding of her grandfather's strength, his wisdom in walking away from a power no one was meant to wield. The village returned to its quiet routine in the days that followed, but Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The cliffs remained as they always had, a silent guardian of secrets she would never fully understand. And though the whisper lingered in her thoughts, she carried with her the knowledge that some mysteries were better left unsolved. As she sat on her porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The door had been opened, but it didn't define her. She had faced the unknown and chosen to let it go, just as her grandfather had. And in that choice, she found her own kind of strength, a quiet resolve to live her life on her terms, leaving the shadows of the past where they belonged.